welcome to the Transportation Committee for this Tuesday, January 17th. And just wanted to remind everybody that all of our hearings are recorded, live streamed on House Public Information. And our first item of business is the minutes for our last meeting of January 12th. Representative Petersburg.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I do so move those minutes.
Okay, is there discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed, the motion prevails. And today, members, we have a couple of presentations. We hope to hear a bill on Thursday, Representative Keeler's bill on Indian employment, and then we'll have another overview from DPS. And we're still waiting for a number of bills that are ready to go, but we don't have fiscal notes, so we'll probably be hearing more bills next week. But this is really an opportunity for you to become familiar with. These aren't general agency overviews, but really specific to some budget issues that we'll be facing this session. So our first overview is from MnDOT, and I'll just preface this by saying that while we have a surplus in the general fund, and that obviously will impact some of our work here, a couple of the main dedicated funds we have for roads and bridges are not operating at a surplus, and in fact, we're in a deficit situation. So very important that we listen carefully today to that issue, and I've also asked MnDOT to give us some preliminary information on what they perceive the unmet need is for roads and bridges in our state so that we can align that as best we can with different opportunities for financing those needs. So that's what we have today at the beginning, and then we'll also hear from the Metropolitan Council, which is probably next to MnDOT our second most, the agency that we fund in terms of numbers is number 2, and then we'll get into DPS on Thursday. So with that, I would like to call on our MnDOT Commissioner, who I saw here, and she has a whole team. I know that Commissioner Daubenberger and Budget Director Brown are with us today, and we're very, very honored to have you, Commissioner, and appreciate your work, and welcome to the Transportation Committee. Please state your name for the record and proceed with your testimony.
Thank you. Let's see. Good morning, Mr. Chair.
Good morning.
Can you hear me through this microphone? Just testing technology. Can you hear me through the microphone?
Yeah, this
Testing.
is the tech room.
Can you hear better from this one?
Testing, are these on?
Yeah.
Hello? Hello? It says mic's live.
Testing. Can you hear through this one?
Those are all working.
Did it sound like this one was working? Testing.
Yeah.
Hello?
Testing.
Yep. All right.
It's just that one.
Else research to say today?
All right, thank
Okay.
you.
Welcome. Now we can start. Welcome to the committee, and please state your name for the record. Proceed.
Thank you, and good morning, Mr. Chair and members. My name is Nancy Daubenberger, and I was recently reappointed to the role of Commissioner of the Department of Transportation. And thank you for the opportunity to present this information today. I'll be turning it over to my colleague, Sam Brown, our Budget Director. But just a little bit about me for those who I haven't met yet, and we do look forward to meeting with all of you. But I've been with MnDOT for a little over 23 years now in roles in engineering and management roles, but most recently in the role of Deputy Commissioner and Chief Engineer for the agency. Took over the role of temporary commissioner back in March of last year, and then more permanently in the commissioner role in May, and it's very much been an honor to serve the state of Minnesota and support the Walz-Flanagan administration, and I'm very happy to be here with you today. And again, thank you for letting us present our information. At this point, if okay with you, I'll turn it over to Sam Brown.
Good morning, Chair Hortenstein, members. For the record, my name is Sam Brown, and I am currently the Interim Budget Director at MnDOT. And it sounds like everyone can hear me all right. Sound is good. Today we are here to present an update on the November 22 forecast and the impact to transportation funding. I do want to make sure that everyone has access and is aware of the online forecast document that we have available at our website, and includes much of the detail we will cover today in more detail. As Chair Hornstein referenced, earlier in December, MMB released a forecast on the general fund, which included a significant surplus. Today we will be focusing specifically on different revenue sources funding various modes of transportation. In consultation with Minnesota Management and Budget, the Department of Revenue, MnDOT prepares fund statements for the 6 transportation funds, including the Highway User Tax Distribution Fund, which we often refer to as the HUTD Fund, the Trunk Highway Fund, our County State Aid Highway Fund, which is often referred to as CSAH, and then the Municipal State Aid Street, or MSAS Fund, as well as our State Airports Fund and our Transit Assistance Fund. This forecast includes actuals from fiscal year 22, as well as updated estimates for fiscal year 23 through 25 from the previous forecast in February of 2022. An additional biennium is reflected in fiscal year 26 and 27 as part of this forecast as well. Much of today's presentation will focus on the revenue that funds our state highway system, the highways in each of Minnesota's 87 counties, and streets across Minnesota's municipalities. The HUTD Fund receives revenue from 3 primary sources. Those are the blue boxes on the top of this chart. So you have your gas tax, the tab fees, and then the motor vehicle sales tax, referenced as MVEST. There are also other sources, including the state sales tax, which mostly consists of the general sales tax on motor vehicle repair or replacement parts. The top row of blue boxes on this chart depict these revenue sources along with the amount and percentage of revenue deposited into the HUTD fund. Of the total revenue in the HUTD fund, after the gas tax revenue transfers to the DNR, 95% is allocated by constitutional formula to the Trunk Highway Fund, which receives 62%, CSAH Fund, which receives 29%, and then the MSAS Fund, which receives 9%. Dollars transferred to the DNR fund various activities related to motorboats, snowmobiles, all-terrain vehicles, to name a few. The remaining 5% is referred to as the 5% set aside. That goes to fund town roads and town bridges, as well as the flexible highway account. We'll now transition to the amounts of revenue we are forecasting to collect for each of the primary revenue sources within the HUTD fund. And we'll start with the gas tax. To familiarize yourself with these graphs, the green bars represent revenue projected as part of the November forecast, and the blue line represents revenue estimates from the last forecast in February 2022. The current gas tax rate in Minnesota is 28.5 cents per gallon. That's 25 cents plus a 3.5 cent debt service surcharge. that is used for debt obligations for capital projects on our trunk highway system. The outlook for fuel consumption is largely affected by vehicle miles traveled, VMT we refer to that as, and fuel efficiency of vehicles. Relying heavily on the most current projections from IHS Markit, which is the same economic consultant firm MMB uses to develop the general fund forecast, we are anticipating revenues to increase only slightly through fiscal year 23 and 24, before gas taxes began to decrease by less than 1% each year thereafter. The decrease we start seeing in later years is largely related to fuel efficiency of the current fleet of vehicles in the state. The motor vehicle registration revenue is based on the value and age of a vehicle. Overall, vehicle sales are expected to continue to grow in future years, according to the most current IHS market forecast. This will certainly impact registration revenue and explain the year-over-year growth we anticipate throughout the forecast period. However, revenue collected thus far in fiscal year 23 is currently well below forecasted amounts, and as a result, revenue only grows minimally in the current fiscal year. Thereafter, revenue is projected to grow by approximately 4% per year on average over the remaining forecast period. Motor vehicle sales tax are subject to a 6.5% vehicle sales tax. This includes sales by car dealers and private individuals. Of this revenue, 60% is deposited into the HUTD fund, while the remaining 40% is deposited into the Transit Assistance Fund. And I will cover that in a few slides. Department of Revenue prepares the official forecast of this revenue. Overall, motor vehicle sales tax revenue is projected to decrease compared to what we were seeing in the February 22 forecast for all years. So when looking at all HUTD revenues, overall, they are down by approximately 3.5% in the current biennium compared to estimates from February 2022. That's approximately $184 million. In future biennia, fiscal year 24-25, revenues are also down compared to February 22 forecast by approximately 3.8%, or approximately $210 million. Well, much of this discussion thus far has compared revenue amounts to previous forecasts. This chart summarizes the year-over-year growth of revenues within the HUTD fund. We covered gas tax, tab fees, and motor vehicle sales tax in more detail, but overall, revenue continues to grow each year. In fiscal year 23, we are forecasting a 2.5% growth compared to what we collected in fiscal year 2022. However, the growth rates are less than what we had assumed last February, as is highlighted on the bottom row of this table. Note that the other revenues include the interest on cash in the fund, departmental earnings, fines and surcharges. These amounts are small, approximately $4 million, compared to the overall $2.5 billion we collect in revenue within the HUTD fund. While we do grow year over year for revenues, the reality is revenue is not keeping up with inflation, though. This graph illustrates the fact that over the last 20 years, the revenue growth has been at about 3.5%. However, when looking at inflation and the cost of doing construction, that has increased over 5% during the same time, resulting in a nearly negative 2% real growth during that time. In the next 5 years, we anticipate inflation at approximately 8.5% and well above the growth rate we anticipate revenues to be collected. MnDOT's needs to budget for estimated funding over the next 20 years for state highways. This is identified in the State Highway Investment Plan, often referred to as the MnSHIP. MnSHIP directs capital funding on the nearly 12,000 miles of the state highways. And when we talk about state highways, we are referring to the interstates, US highways, and Minnesota highways, which MnDOT is directly responsible for. This plan was last updated in 2017, and it identified $39 billion in transportation needs as itemized in the pie chart on this slide. However, long-term projections over this time only assumed $21 billion in available revenue, leaving approximately an $18 billion funding gap over those 20 years. Since 2017, MnDOT's list of projects and necessary work has grown, and MnDOT is now projecting a funding gap between $19 and $27 billion over the next 20 years. Current estimates include 30 to 33 billion in available funding and between 52 and 57 billion in needs to meet our performance targets and other key goals on the state highway system. The increase is due to several factors, including projected costs of inflation, refined and more thorough planning processes, new state goals, and investment areas that did not exist 5 years ago. The low end of this funding gap reflects MnDOT successfully achieving MnDOT's preliminary goals of reducing VMT, vehicles miles traveled, or VMT, and estimates show that this could reduce our overall funding need by approximately $5 billion over the next 20 years. MnDOT is also prioritizing funding for essential areas of work in the transportation sector, including climate resiliency, sustainability, accessibility, and public engagement. As I mentioned, we are now in the process of developing that next MnSHIP, and on this slide I have our rough timeline. The new plan is currently being updated and will be released likely this fall. Another topic that we were asked to speak to are the condition of our bridges and our highways. As a pie chart showed on the previous slides, much of the need focuses on maintaining bridge and pavement condition targets. Bridge condition is assigned during regular inspection of bridges. Bridges both on the national highway system and off both fall well short of targets set for bridges in good condition, and the percentage of bridges on the national highway system that are in poor condition currently exceed that target. 10 years from now, bridge conditions both on the national highway system and off continue to deteriorate, and the number of bridges in poor condition only grow. Bridges rated in poor are safe to drive on, but are near that point where significant investment and repairs or replacement will be necessary. Measuring pavement quality on MnDOT's roads help the agency plan for areas that need most improvement. Poor ride quality ranges from uneven surfaces to cracks in the road that can make driving quality poor. Good ride quality means even surfaces and pavements that provide safe driving experience. Poor ride quality across the three systems were below or at target in 2021. However, at current levels of funding, MnDOT expects that the state highway pavement to resume a long-term decline. So going back to revenue, the change we are seeing as part of the November forecast impacts funds allocated to the Trunk Highway Fund, as well as the CSA and MSAS funds. The table on this slide focuses on the available Trunk Highway Fund balance and how that has changed since the February 22 forecast. MnDOT's internal policy requires a portion of Trunk Highway funds be reserved to protect against a major shortfall in revenues. There is a bit of detail on this slide, so I will take a few minutes to kind of walk through the different lines. The first line is the available fund balance we projected as part of the February 22 forecast last February. Following this line are the changes to the Trunk Highway revenues, including the amount of revenues transferred from the HUTD, federal revenues, trunk highway revenues, and then prior year adjustments. The sustainable change in federal revenues we are seeing in fiscal year 24 and 25 recognize IIJA funding that we covered last week, which is the Federal Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. However, since last session adjourned without approving the increase in budget authority, MnDOT's spending line does not include this IIJA funding. As a result, by the end of fiscal year 24 and 25 biennium, there is over $400 million in unreserved trunk highway funds, as noted last time, as noted on the last line of the chart. Again, this is largely because of not having the necessary budget authority to spend IIJA funding. Assuming MnDOT receives the necessary budget authority as part of this legislative session, it would leave approximately $23 million of unreserved fund balances available each year through the forecast period. Before we switch our attention to funding of the other modes, I will briefly cover this slide, which depicts the debt service estimates compared with policy limits for the forecast period. MnDOT's internal debt management policy states that debt service should not exceed 20% of annual state revenues in the trunk highway fund. The table shows the estimated debt service costs from the trunk highway fund, which range from nearly 14% in fiscal year 22 and peaks at 18.7% in fiscal year 2027. To remain within policy limits, there's approximately $225 million in additional bonding capacity. However, bonding capacity could increase if authorizations are spread over multiple years. I'll now quickly transition to funding for the local roads and bridges. The CASA fund receives transfers from the HUTD fund and revenues from investment income, as well as revenues from the motor vehicle lease sales tax. Minnesota statutes then provide the criteria by which funds are allocated across Minnesota's 87 counties. The MSAS only receives transfers from the HUTD fund. Minnesota statutes also provide that criteria of how funds are allocated to cities having a population of 5,000 or greater. And as I mentioned earlier, the town roads and bridge funding is that 5% set aside of the total revenue from the HUTD fund as shown on slide 3. This allocation process occurs as part of the commissioner's order issued in January, and we are currently working on this, and the allocations will be based on this November 22 forecast. While there's still some detailed adjustments that could ultimately swing the official distribution amounts, based on the November 22 forecast, the allocations are down by about 4% in fiscal year 20, or sorry, in calendar year 23 compared to calendar year 22. In regards to transit, I'll largely be speaking to Greater Minnesota Transit, knowing that Met Council will be here to speak to the Metropolitan Transit following our MnDOT's presentation. The Transit Assistance Fund receives revenue from the motor vehicle lease sales tax, as well as the motor vehicle sales tax, as shown on this chart. 40% of the total motor vehicle sales tax revenue that is collected is deposited into the Transit Assistance Fund. Of this revenue, 90% is allocated to Metropolitan Transit, and the remaining 10% is deposited for Greater Minnesota Transit. As of fiscal year 2018, 38% of motor vehicle lease sales tax is allocated to Transit Assistance Fund for Greater Minnesota Transit. When looking at revenues for Greater Minnesota Transit, and these are the top two highlighted lines on this slide, we are seeing revenues well below what we forecasted in February 2022. In fiscal year 23, motor vehicle sales tax is down approximately 5%, and motor vehicle lease sales tax is down nearly 20%. While we are able to maintain current spending in fiscal year 23 for Greater Minnesota Transit, the fund is not in compliance with the fund balance policy. As shown on this slide, we assume utilizing a portion of the fund balance reserves and then restoring that fund balance in the fiscal year 24-25 biennium. However, starting in fiscal year 24 and beyond, program funding is set at about $64 million a year, which is down from approximately $73 million a year. That was from the February 22 forecast. As it relates to state airport funding, there are 3 funds that make up the total consolidated state airport funds, and that includes our state airport fund, 2 revolving funds, so the hangar revolving loan fund, and then our air transportation service revolving fund. We'll be focusing today on the state's airport fund, where 133 publicly owned airports receive state funds. The state forecast for the state airport fund is focused on sales tax on aircraft, the airline flight property tax paid, the aircraft registration tax, and then the aviation gas and special fuels tax. The forecast for sales tax on aircraft and registration taxes are based primarily on prior history and vary significantly from year to year. The aviation fuel tax is anticipated to increase over the forecast period compared to what we had in the February 22 forecast. Overall, state airport fund revenues are up by nearly 14% in fiscal year 23. We are currently projecting a significant one-time surplus in fiscal year 23 of $13.7 million, and then additional ongoing annual surplus of approximately $2 million starting in fiscal year 24. Chair Hornstein, members, greatly appreciate the time to provide an update on the transportation forecast. Commissioner Daubenberger and I are available to help answer any questions.
Thank you for that really excellent presentation. I thought that you digested a lot of important and complex concepts very clearly and directly, and that's appreciated. And yeah, I mean, I think there's a couple of pretty important things that I gleaned before we just get to questions, which is, you know, the pavement condition is alarming in my mind. You know, that we have over 10% now in poor condition, and that is trending in the wrong direction. And I think that, you know, given what we've seen with our weather the last couple of weeks, you know, it just adds insult to injury, right? When we have roads that are also impacted by weather and that are in poor condition. And I'll have a question later. I want the committee members to go first here, but and we have several already. First, I'd like to start with Chair Cagle.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And so I'm looking at slide 4. I'm just kind of curious is acceleration of EV adoption taken into account when looking at this, or was this kind of like pre all the tax benefits and stuff for EVs?
Chair Hornstein, members, yes, that is included, especially when we're looking at data that we receive from IHS Markit. However, it's important to note that the overall percentage of the state's fleet that are all electric is, while it is growing, it is a minimal percentage. And especially when you're looking at Minnesota's fleet of vehicles, it's significantly non-electric vehicles.
And then one other question.
Proceed.
So I'm looking at the trunk highway. I don't know if this slide is numbered. I think it's 15. So the federal revenues fiscal year 23, if we pass House File 26, the one for the spending authorization, would that change that number or would that remain the same?
Mr. Brown.
Chair Hornstein, Representative, let me get to the right slide here.
Yeah, that one.
So overall would not change the 23 million for available. We did not have that as revenue for 22-23 as no legislation was enacted. But once we added in for 24-25, if we received that, then we would go down to the approximately 23 million per year. But right now, the 22-23 is not included on that slide.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair Cagle. And I'll just add that, we're well aware of the decline in revenue in the future of gas tax. And it's really incumbent on this committee and this legislature to take a look at different options. And I'm looking at Representative Elkins because he's put a lot of thought and effort into this. He'll have some proposals. But also, Senator Howe over the years has also had some ideas around this. And, I think we want to take a look at any proposal that addresses this question because the trend line is pretty rapid for utilization of electric vehicles and more energy efficient vehicles over these next 10 years. So we should get on this. This is really critical, and I appreciate the work and thought that Representative Elkins has put into this and others. So we're taking a look at a variety of options here and certainly want to stay in touch with MnDOT about that. Representative Petersburg.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I think I have 3 questions. The first one is related to the slide on page 9 when you talked about inflation versus construction inflation. And my question in regard to that is, why is there such a growing difference between inflation and construction inflation? And you can look at that chart and see that as we have increased the amount of spending in the area, which is much faster, much steeper than any other times prior to that, to 1980, it seems like our construction versus regular inflation has grown up. Is there any correlation between the larger dollars of projects and that inflation, or is there another reason why the construction inflation is greater than regular inflation, which a lot of the supplies and products that they use are the same as other industries?
Excellent question. Mr. Brown.
Thank you, Chair Hornstein, Representative Petersburg. So the chart is showing the blue lines are the revenues that we are collecting, and then the red line would be that adjusted to inflation. So it is our internal construction cost for construction is higher than what we see for traditional inflation. To get into specifics on why that's higher, would probably be bringing in, we'd have to kind of dive into that and get back to more specifics on that. But it has been traditionally, what we have seen is that the cost to do construction is well above what we're seeing for other types of projects. But I'd be more than happy to kind of work with our experts in that area.
Thank you. Representative Petersburg.
Thank you. I'll just have one comment before I move on to the question, though, and that is that oftentimes when there is an infusion of a lot of dollars, there tends to be less competition, and so prices tend to grow. And so I'll be curious to know if anybody can figure that out. My other question is in regards to on page 11, in which you said that your low end of estimated need reflects Minnesota successfully achieving their preliminary goals of reducing per capita vehicle miles traveled. I'm trying to figure out how that works, because as the vehicle miles traveled, almost all of our revenues is based upon the number of miles people travel. And so if they're traveling less, and when we talk about electrical vehicles in which we are not really collecting that on per vehicle miles traveled, how will that actually reduce the deficit when we're actually going to be collecting less dollars as well? Just doesn't quite follow me.
Commissioner.
Mr. Chair and Representative, thank you for that question. So when we're talking about achieving that goal of vehicle miles traveled reduced, that then equates to less demand on our system. So then our needs number goes down. So even though right now with the gas tax revenues, and if we do have fewer miles traveled out there, that can affect the revenue side, it also works toward bringing down the needs.
Representative Petersburg.
I guess I'm still confused, because I agree. I understand that as you have less wear and tear on the roads, there's less cost. But if you're also reducing the revenue for that, I don't know that it would make a negative change overall. And so that was the question that I had. Maybe it's something for ponder for later. The last question is more of a comment, though, is that I will be kind of watching as we bring presentations forward about why there's need. This large infusion of IIJ money, especially in bridges, doesn't seem to be reflected in the charts that say that there's a deficit in bridge funding. So I'll be just looking forward to that. And so please kind of keep in mind that I'll be asking questions about IIJ infusion, because those are dollars that we can use to help offset future needs. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Commissioner. And so I'm going to just let folks know who's on the list, and we're going to cut it off after Representative Olson because we want to get to the Met Council presentation. So I have Representative Brand, Kraft, West, and Olson, and then we'll move on after that. Representative Brand.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. If you go back a slide to page 8, the HUTD revenues, it seems to be an anomaly, but in FY20, if you look under sales tax, state sales tax, 119%. Could you help me out with that number to give me more information?
Commissioner or Budget Director?
Chair Hornstein, Representative, can you repeat the line again? Which one?
Yeah, FY20, state sales tax, 119%.
And this is on page 8
Yep.
of the presentation. Page 8, column 1 on the left side.
Yes. So Chair Hornstein, Representative, that is a state sales tax on the use of, or for revenue collected on auto repair and replacement parts largely, as well as a couple of the rental taxes. That is set in statute. So in 2018, it was implemented, and then at a certain dollar amount, and then it was phased in. And so from 2019 to 2020, it increased significantly due to the statutory amount going up so much in between years. So that is truly just reflecting the number in law.
Gotcha. Okay, I have one follow-up.
Sure.
Thank you, Mr.
Proceed.
Chair. I have one more question, and if you go to page 3, we're talking about HUTD sources and uses. I'm particularly interested in the flexible highway account because I know that, in my area of the world, in greater Minnesota, there's some turnback that's happening between the state and the county. And I'm just kind of curious, and that sounds like that's in that flexible highway account. Could you tell me what 53.5% looks like in terms of a total amount?
Budget Director, do you want to take that one?
Yes, Chair Hornstein, Representative. If you give me 1 sec, I can pull that up. I have it back, but if I could,
Okay. That's fine.
I don't want to slow things down by trying to pull it.
That's,
Okay,
we'll wait for that
Okay, I could-
thank you.
another time. Okay, so next we have Representative Kraft, and Representative West is on deck. Representative Kraft.
Chair Hornstein, Mr. Brown, a few questions. One, a comment. I agree with Representative Petersburg. I'm very interested on page 9, that inflation at 8.5%, because that's a significant amount when applied over several years. And if that were some percentage less, that chart would look substantially differently. On your funding gap, does this include a funding gap for the county and the metropolitan and the municipal roads? Or is that just is it that funding gap separate from those?
Yes, Chair Hornstein, Representative. So the gap, currently MnSHIP, that 900, and then which grows in our next MnSHIP, that is just state roads, state highways. Does not include the county or municipal roads funding gap.
Then, thank you for that question, Representative Kraft. And, we'll definitely have in the next couple of weeks folks from counties, municipalities, the small cities, the townships. All of these are really important, interested parties in terms of what we do here, and they all have, separate set of needs. So we're going to definitely get into that. Excellent question.
All right.
And then you have one more.
Yeah. So, thank you. Yes, coming from City Council, I appreciate that we'll talk about that. On slide 14, you talked about the debt policy. You showed this at 20%. Are you saying that it's a problem that right now, are you just providing us information? Or are you saying that that's an issue that we should be addressing?
Budget Director.
Chair Hornstein, Representative. That's just our internal policy. As we bond more, we are nearing that 20% max. Precedent is that we do not go over that 20%. MMB, this Minnesota Management and Budget, has similar internal policies for overall bonding of the state. So I wouldn't frame it as necessarily as a problem, but just more of the awareness that to maintain that internal policy, that we keep an eye on what that 20% mark is. And then, just to hand it over to the Commissioner, I think she had a follow-up.
Yes, I think that, Commissioner, you had something you wanted to add to Representative Kraft's first question, correct? Proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, Representative Kraft, for your question about the needs on the local roads. And as our Budget Director, Sam Brown, was mentioning, these needs only reflect the trunk highways. However, I did want to be clear, we had noted that in talking with and collaborating with our local partners, they identified another $5 to $6 billion of need on the trunk highway system that we didn't have in our needs analysis for the projects they would like to see. So not the projects that meet our performance goals, but additional needs on the trunk highway system identified by local agencies. So just wanted to provide that clarification.
Thank you, that's very helpful. Okay, we have Representative West, and then we'll conclude with Representative Olson. Representative West.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and good to meet you, Commissioner. I hope you share the same affinity for Highway 65 that your predecessor did. Margaret was great to work with and helped us get money for that, and would very much appreciate that being on your radar, because the 1.5-mile stretch of Highway 65 has, according to a study done by the Met Council, 11 of the 31 worst intersections of the state. So that is something that's going to come up in our committee, and I also hope that the department will be more amenable to earmarks, because that's how we got the bill passed last time, and that's how we'll get substantial transportation funding in the future. But my question is, rather than just stating my love of my road, is what are some plans? You know, you talked about how general fund revenue, the gas tax revenues and those kind of things are going down, and motor vehicle sales tax, those kind of revenues are going up. Do you have any plans, or what are your plans to get more general fund money? Because that's the way we can keep it. If you look at the graph of the funding, there was a substantial part was general fund money coming in. What are some plans that the department has to increase general fund revenues into the department to help build our road system, which needs $18 billion, which we have that in surplus, by the way. We could take care of 20 years right now.
Commissioner.
Mr. Chair.
Scattered chuckles, I heard.
I'll be here all week.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and Representative West, thank you for that question. Yes, the department is very interested in continuing to work with the legislature on additional revenues in terms of what the state of Minnesota is coming out with. Our governor will be coming out with his budget proposal on January 24th, or by January 24th. And you know, we're open to considering other revenue sources that the legislature might bring forth as the session goes on. So really look forward to continuing to work with you on that.
Thank you. And we'll end here this section with Representative Olson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. To Mr. Brown, back to the gas tax revenues slide here, and you had made a comment that stated, looking into the future, there's a reduction about 1% per year is what you're calculating. The question is, how far into the future do we kind of look at that projection, and barring any significant and potentially painful legislation from the state, will this trajectory kind of continue at that 1% reduction every year?
Chair Hornstein, Representative. Of course, there's always the unknown. For the purposes of this forecast, we only go out to fiscal year 27, and that is where our comfort level is. And that's where we're starting to see the decrease, though it's, you know, the assumption is as vehicles become more efficient that would continue. But without, you know, any level of certainty beyond what we're seeing in the next few years, which is also, there's a risk there, but out of fiscal year 27, we really don't have a lot of confidence.
Perfect. Mr. Chair, can I follow up? Okay, perfect, thank you. So, I mean, we're looking at the next 4 years, minus 1% reduction. If that continues into the future, this probably is not the that we're not losing that much revenue in the form of a gas tax. So what I'm kind of looking at, and what I kind of want to bring everyone's attention to, is that fuel will be a significant source of driving into the future for a long term. So we need to start looking at a holistic effect. If we're talking about reducing vehicle miles traveled, we're talking about electric vehicles, we're trying to, decarbonize this world. One thing that I'd like to push and just kind of look at is the use of ethanol in our state. Because here's the deal, I just did some math, and if you use 1 gallon of ethanol now, that's what vehicle runs on 100% ethanol, okay? But if you're using ethanol, 1 gallon of ethanol is a 36% reduction in carbon into this atmosphere, all right? So if we're looking at a holistic look at trying to reduce carbon into this atmosphere, I would ask that we don't just discount ethanol, because it's going to be around for the next couple hundred years potentially, and we're actually making significant reductions in carbon with the decarbonization of ethanol, storing it underground, that kind of stuff. We're actually getting to a net neutral type of position with regard to ethanol usage. So there are significant reductions that we can make today that will be more significant than just a 1% reduction in the gas tax, showing that there's a 1% reduction in the use of gas in this state. Thank you.
Thanks for that. And I don't see, there may be more questions, but there's no one else on the list. So I want to thank you. And again, please feel free to reach out to our representatives from MnDOT through either your staff or directly. I've found that over the years they've been very responsive. And many of you may know Mr. Eric Rudin, who is here often, and others. So, please reach out to them as well. I'll just conclude by saying that, as I mentioned before, the actual condition of the infrastructure is something that I think is a very important part of your presentation. And then, I look at the pie chart on page 10, and, just one quick question for you before you leave. Do you have priorities within these priorities? For example, pavement condition accounts for over 1/3. Bridge condition, another almost 7%. Roadside infrastructure condition, 8.6%. And then we have, accessible pedestrian infrastructure. That's a safety question. You have travel or safety at 3.5%. So, again, it seems like most of this pie chart has to do with condition of the infrastructure and very specific safety concerns. I've always felt that safety is an important lens in which we need to look at transportation questions. So before you leave, priorities within your priorities. And it seems to me that fixing our roads first appears to be, a priority within a priority, but I was just interested in your thoughts about that.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate that question. And yes, safety is a high priority for MnDOT, of course. We are currently in the process of updating our MnSHIP, as we were talking about, our State Highway Investment Plan. And as a part of that, we went through a rather rigorous first round of public engagement to get input on these different investment priorities from Minnesotans. And we're at a point right now where we're taking that input and revisiting what we have for from the previous MnSHIP for what the priorities were with preserving the system and the other safety needs and other investment categories, and updating that. And we'll be coming out with a second round of public engagement process late winter, so in the next couple months. And so we'll be further discussing that with you all, our legislature, our stakeholders, our public partners, and the general public, of course.
Appreciate that. Thank you so much. Members, we're now going to turn to the Metropolitan Council, and in your packet you have a handout entitled Regional Transportation, and we will, we have the chair is with us, which we very much appreciate. And Ms. Bogie, the regional administrator. So we'll get you set up here. And I saw, just as we're waiting, that Chair Zelli was very attentive to the MnDOT presentation, because as you know, he served our state very well as the MnDOT commissioner, so we really have a wealth of transportation experience here at the table.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
And welcome. Please state your name for the record and proceed.
I'm Charlie Zolli, Chair of the Metropolitan Council. I am joined by Mary Bogie, who's our Regional Administrator, and it's my honor to give you an overview of the Metropolitan Council and really get into the budget and some of the financial projections. And it's true, I always appreciate listening to MnDOT presentations, and I'm very fond of the expertise within that agency. And I have heard that MnDOT and Met Council haven't always gotten along, and I just want you to know over the past 7 years, they've had a wonderful relationships. When we think about overview of Met Council, it's just kind of good to kind of ground ourselves in understanding that we're actually a lot more than just transportation. We have an opportunity to be a fundamental kind of a planner for the regional, for the metropolitan region. You know, there was a time when the state of Minnesota had a planning agency. We don't. Really, Met Council serves that purpose over the past 50 years. I'll probably spend a lot more time on transportation, which is of your interest, but I just want to give you an opportunity to give you just a big overview because, you know, so many of these parts actually, you know, relate to each other. Most people understand this, and I'm saying this because I think there are many of you who are experts in the room or even former council members. But Met Council is not a state agency. It is a cabinet agency to the extent that the governor has appointed its members, but it's a 17-person policymaking board, of which I am able to serve. We have 16 different districts. We are, as I mentioned, fundamentally a planning agency, but we both operate and plan really these large kind of system-wide services. When you think about other regions around the country, they have kind of a council of governments. There's various ways that metro areas come together, but they probably have a large city that becomes the bedrock, like being a Boston or LA. Well, in this case, we have 7 counties, which is the footprint of Met Council. But within that, there's 180 different cities. And I just want to remind everybody that the largest city, Minneapolis, only represents 11% of the population of the metropolitan area. So it really does make sense that we have, out of just efficiency, the opportunity to both operate a transit system, do regional planning in transportation and other areas, as well as we manage wastewater. So we're in 3 different divisions. Community development is an area where we do a lot of our comprehensive planning, but we also operate the largest housing authority. We actually manage Section 8 vouchers. There are others within the metro region, but we cover a lot of areas that aren't covered by the large cities. We have government grants. We give federal grants. We give some of our own livability grants from our tax base to help support economic development. We are our channel of state funding, legacy funding for regional parks. So we have a really important kind of park division. There's other areas associated with some of that economic development, but it is, again, closely sometimes associated with transportation, but it in itself is not transportation. Environmental services, you know, we don't often talk to, and we're not actually part of the state financial package when we think about the wastewater services. This is a fee-based system, which is actually, as they say, out of sight, out of mind. The interceptor system around the metro is in pretty good shape because we have a robust capital repair, maintenance, and expansion programs. And we have had the great fortune of 40 years ago where stormwater is separated from wastewater. And so these big storms that are being experienced around the country, and certainly here, that water is going into lakes and rivers, but not overflooding our wastewater system. So it is something I think we're very proud of, but we and again, don't seek state funding, but it is one that operates well. Do a lot of research, on water quality, source of water. We're not part of the source of fresh water, but we're certainly working with DNR and NPCA on kind of water issues from a kind of a research point of view. Which really gets us to transportation. There's many different parts of transportation. Again, we are both a planner and an operator, and we actually contract with others to operate a regional transportation system. We do a lot of that through our largest division, which is Metro Transit, but we also have other regional operators and transit providers which are channeled both federal assistance as well as some of our other funds that help support them. A lot of the planning, and we'll get into this in a minute, particularly as regards to our role as the Metropolitan Planning Organization for the region, is done through a Transportation Advisory Board. So we actually have a division, which I'll get to later in the presentation, really describes how we actually do this role as a federal planner. Getting to Met Transit, again, as I mentioned, it's the largest division, and we operate a number of different modes. I think everybody's familiar with it. Let me just talk about ridership, because I think everybody is perhaps most interested in how we are recovering in terms of our ridership system. I would say roughly 2022, last year, was about 20% higher than the year before. And we're actually seeing this almost month by month, that ridership is coming back. What is interesting, and I think would be interesting for all of you especially, is which mode is doing best. And I think this graph kind of shows the picture, even though the bus rapid transit does not represent the largest share of our system. It is certainly the one that's recovering and has been really doing the best in terms of both service and customer interest. This is the part that's growing, and it's not just the ABIT systems. We think about the Orange Line that's just started this last year, and certainly we are looking at other transit ways, which we'll get into in a minute. So we think over the course of the next 4 years especially, we'll see even greater size of the system, but even greater ridership potential, because it is the one where I think really people are gravitating to. Also, you'll see, I'll just focus on the other side, what's the system that's performing the worst? It is the express bus or commuter rail. It is the one coming from the farthest part of the region to the center city. And these both have been, really reflects the employment scene in downtowns, but also the fact that there's not as much express service. It has both been reduced and the ridership has come down. It has come up again, it's recovering a little, but not as much as some of the regular bus system has. We can talk more about that, but just knowing that, and this is where we share a lot of information with MnDOT, think about commuter and commuter sheds and commuter timing. It isn't these two humps as much in the transit system. We're finding more and more use of the transit system is not just for jobs. It is for jobs, but it's not like a big rush hour and then the afternoon rush hour. It's really almost peaks in the middle of the day. We're finding that people are using the buses and the trains for kind of everyday living. Students, very strong passenger base, but also those that are going to groceries, medical appointments, those who are getting around the metro without using a car. And of course, that's ultimately our goal, which I'll get into in a minute. This kind of a behavior survey we've just initiated, and we will be continuing to do that surveys throughout the system and have better information later in the year. But some of our preliminary pilot survey programs is really indicating how these 9 to 5 commutes have really changed. And we think that we'll probably see, once we get the full survey complete, and we'll be able to share with you some of the same conclusions. One of the challenges and one of the perhaps one of the biggest challenges we have, of course, is we have less operations out on the street. This is due to driver and technician shortages. We have shortages in every job category in Metro Council, whether it be attorneys, IT personnel, but certainly drivers and mechanics. That is really fundamental, and it has caused us to reduce the amount of operations even more than we would with the reduced demand. However, I think we're seeing some signs over the past couple of months with some recent employment fairs, and frankly, the fact that we've negotiated a much higher rate for particularly for our entry, but all of our ATU employees, and I would say our police department. We now have a more competitive entry level for attracting and overall compensation rates for retention of our base. And we're seeing whether it's that or change the economy or our approach, which we're being very aggressive to attract new employees. And frankly, we need them not only to get back to the service levels that we've had 2 or 3 years ago, but when we think about the expansion of our ABRT system, some of our transit ways coming on, we have the need for more capacity. And we'll get into that when you think about the future forecasts. We need to bolster our employment ranks and frankly, bolster our employment ranks at higher rates of compensation to be competitive. So again, this 4-year outlook, when you think about the system, and when we talk about a vision for transit, it really is about an interconnected system so people can get to where they need to go within a half an hour. You know, I mean, you shouldn't have to take an hour and a half just to get from your home in Minneapolis to your job in St. Paul. And we're really changing that, not just with large, robust transit ways, but these kind of, and they're more than infill, the operation of these arterial bus rapid transit systems. So this really shows by 2027, the kind of relationship of the transitway development along with the ABRT. So we can certainly, and we'll have the opportunity to talk more about that later in the year, but I fully embrace the thought, a very wise man said, let's be the ABRT capital of North America. So, Mr. Chair, I'm right with you.
Thank you, Chair.
One of the things we should really outline, and we can go deep into every one of these issues, but they're ones that we're really facing head-on with a very, very specific strategic and management focus. Number one, safety and security action plan. We have a 25-part plan, which continues to evolve. We'll actually have a report on it in tomorrow's Committee of the Whole meeting of Met Council. But probably our biggest and most challenging aspect is not necessarily caused by Met Transit, but we live the challenges of our behavior and crime and what happens around stations and in our trains. And so rather than try to hide from it or to say that it's somebody else's issues, we know that we have to be very aggressive in how we deal with it. And it is more than just can be managed through our own police force, although they have a role. We could talk more about that, and there is a role that the legislature can play. But just know that from I view it as coming from a customer point of view. Unless it's a welcoming and safe environment, how do we expect people to use our service? Workforce recruitment, we've already talked about the challenges we need for recruiting and retaining our workforce. We are really gratifying to have a very robust zero-emission bus transition plan. That is one that few operations in the country have as thoughtful an approach we have over a period of the next 10 years to really transition to zero-emission fleet. We think transit is a low carbon just by the nature of being transit, getting cars off the road, but actually having the propulsion systems be electric requires a lot of thought and a lot more infrastructure. This is more than just getting electric buses. This is building the whole charging system and the kind of the network behind it. So it takes a lot of thought. Just as our speed and reliability program, I know there's wonderful advocates who would like to have street light preemptions to solve a lot of our efficiency systems, which we fully embrace, but it is very complicated and it is a system-wide approach, which I'm very pleased that we're making headway to think about how do we get actually smarter about how we deploy our buses, how they're timing, where they stop, and it really comes down to, as they say, the little details, which all add up to a greater performance. I also want to just talk about our marketing programs, really expanding this University of Minnesota Universal Pass kind of shows what you can do. That is tremendously popular already. The idea of actually getting more affordable transit, getting it out there, getting it in the hands of people who really not only can need it, but actually would thrive with it. And so that's kind of a larger kind of marketing side. All this adds up to budgets, which Mary is going to talk about here in a minute. I do want to say in our Metropolitan Transportation Services Division, we not only contract for operations, but we give grants to other transit providers and do a lot of the planning for our metro system. We are subject to both federal and state laws, so there's many of them as part of our planning process, not just transportation, certainly a lot of the environmental processes we work through. We have to be thoughtful about conformity. I'll just touch on our transportation policy plan. You know, we work hand in hand with MnDOT, but we also work with a lot of other stakeholders and those that help develop some of the goals. And we talk about the various performance measures, and the chair mentioned safety. You know, that is clearly an important value, but so is stewardship of the system to make sure that it's sustainable, the health and equity regarding our access to destinations within the metro area for everybody. There's a lot of larger goals that go into a planning process. And then again, this is the Metropolitan Planning Organization. Large metropolitan areas have MPOs. Met Council kind of hosts that MPO function. We really manage it through our Transportation Advisory Board, which I'll get into in a minute. But you think about this cycle of larger goals, working with other stakeholders, including other agencies like MnDOT, where we come together and develop the Transportation Improvement Program. That's a list of projects, those very defined projects for the next 4 years. And we work hand in hand to implement those projects. You might have read about the $350 million that was allocated as part of a regional solicitation. This was federal funds coming through this process and becoming part of the Transportation Improvement Program. That plan for the next 4 years really comes into a set of projects that have been developed through all that kind of goal-setting, performance measures, and feedback. So again, as we implement the projects, we measure the performance, and we develop more expertise to go and be doing it over and again. So again, that's just a snapshot of the planning process. I do want to touch on the tab. I mentioned it a couple of times. This is really a coalition of governments. People suggested, you know, maybe MnDOT should be looking at being a coalition of governments. I really want to point to the fact that actually it is through our tab program, which does a lot of the development of our plan and the funding of our metropolitan transportation, funding puzzle. One thing that is interesting of note, and I've certainly learned, that the TAB makes these recommendations and it goes before the Met Council. The Met Council actually accepts their recommendations. We can either accept or we can send it back to them. I've never heard of us sending back to them. This is not one which is ultimately debated in any projects ever changed at the Met Council. Met Council is simply there to house this function, which is really a kind of a coalition of both elected and citizen members and experts who are developing this kind of regional transit and funding plan. So we can certainly are interested in talking more about that in the future, but I think it's important to note that the function of the TAB really is fundamental to how we both evaluate and actually make our funding decisions. The Transportation Services Division also, as I mentioned, provides grants. It operates some of the important services we have, like Transit Link, but certainly Metro Mobility. Metro Mobility, which we are grateful knowing we're moving toward a forecasted element of the budget, but it really operates in two different zones, just important to know. We have one that's just mandated by the federal government, and that is with the blue area, and then the gray area is what we call non-ADA service. That's state programs. And the only difference is that we are absolutely required to show up at the ADA zones, and that it is kind of on a capacity available basis for the larger area. But we're moving and taking steps toward every person who wants a ride gets a ride. And we're getting very close to being able to, again, have the capacity to do that. Driver shortages are affecting our contractors, but we feel pretty good about where we are given that context. Just to mention that Metro Mobility's ridership has come back pretty close to what it was 3 years ago. That need is there. We expect it to be growing over time as aging population. However, we feel that, again, the efficiency of operating the system well is one that we continue to work on with our contractors. I should mention, we often refer to as suburban operators, but these are those that operate independently with our federal funding and state support. We provide grants as well as other planning services with those suburban areas which have mostly express service to downtowns. Really important to note that there's quite a bit of express service into our downtown areas, mostly operated by Metro Transit, but there's some, and these are the neighborhoods on the map, which we all know about, have independent operations. This is getting into the financial area, and I could just keep talking, and Mary's going to kick me, so this is our expert to kind of go into where we are.
Yeah, thank you. We'll wrap up with this, and then, because we already have 5 questions, so we want to get through those questions and adjourn by 10. So proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Again, my name is Mary Bogan. I'm the council's regional administrator, and I just want to talk a little bit about the impact of the forecast on the Met Council operations. And, you know, we heard from MnDOT previously about gas tax and motor vehicle sales taxes, and this just really shows how that impacted the Met Council. So, to be clear, motor vehicle sales tax are continuing to grow, but they're not growing as quickly as was anticipated in the November forecast. The February forecast is significantly down. If we look out over a 5-year term, it's down about $121 million for our transit services. When we think about motor vehicle sales tax, that funds about 45% of the council's transportation budget. A little bit less than that, as we're depending more on federal revenues here in the last few years, but typically about 45%, along with some state appropriation and also our fares. Also, when we think about MVES funds the bus system. So state appropriations are used to fund Metro Mobility and the light rail system. MVES funds are primarily the bus system. So a lot of volatility in the motor vehicle sales tax, and that really can relate to a lot of things, but primarily that's a market condition that drives that. When the economy tightens, think about it, we shy away from our large purchases, so I'm going to put off the purchase of that car for some time. Also, as we look at today, there's other factors that are impacting that as well, primarily the chip shortage. So even if I wanted to buy a car right now, typically I have these long lead times. And then as well, during the pandemic, there was very slow car sales, and then there was some pent-up demand. And so we had a spike, but then we're really leveling off from that. So there's just a lot of things that are really impacting that motor vehicle sales tax forecast. But it's also kind of an inverse relationship between this revenue source and the transit system. So when the economy is going good and people are buying cars, they're driving those cars and they're not using the transit system. When the transit system, or when the economy is a little bit bad, we see an uptick on ridership. But even when the economy is good, I want you to park that car in your garage that you just bought and jump on the transit system. So just that relationship between transit and a motor vehicle sales tax revenue is kind of a strange relationship of a way to fund a transit system. So I really wanted to talk about how this forecast then looks into our budget. And so this is a typical chart that we've shown you in the past that reflects the council's outlook over the next couple bienniums. Our deficit has certainly grown significantly. We've still been able to push that deficit out into the state fiscal year 26-27 biennium. Primarily, that's because we've received significant federal relief funds through the CARES Act, the CRISA, and the ARP funding. And you can see that in that line down towards the bottom half of the chart. But also, I just want to say that this structural position is not new for the council. We have long been struggling with a revenue that doesn't support the needs of the system. And we've been back over and over to the legislature for help in funding the system. If I look back in history, there's a lot of one-time fixes that we would see to the system. So back in state fiscal year 18 and 19, that's the last time we saw a really big MVEST loss between the February to February forecast. It was about $80 million in the state. Then the legislature fortunately came in with $70 million of state general fund to prop up the system. But again, that was one-time funding, and as that expired in 2020, we see the fiscal cliff again coming forward for us. Changes that we've made in this forecast that are different from the last time we were here to see you is we've brought down the service levels to more match what we're seeing on the system today and have them growing from about a 70% level to about 90% over the years of this forecast. We've also have 10-minute intervals for light rail, growing back to 15-minute, growing back to 10-minute intervals. And our ridership and fare collections are at about 64%, growing to about 83%. And then also the wage increases that the chair mentioned earlier. So again, looks pretty dismal. Here, this next slide is what it would have looked like had we not had the federal funds come in to again, on a one-time basis, prop up the system. We would have been in much more dire straits, even in the last fiscal year, but as we go out, much bigger issue in funding the transit system.
Thank you so much. And we'll start with questions. And I appreciated the last slide because I think that was something Representative Petersburg was getting at with MnDOT. So I think as we layer on the federal funding that we hope to be matching this session, and we started with Chair Cagle's bill, and there'll be others after that. So we have 5 questions, and that should take us to about our time of adjournment. I can't really add more members at this point. We'll start with Vice Chair Tapke. You're on the list, Representative West. He's looking at me. Yeah, you're on.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I've got 2 quick questions. One, if we can go to slide 8 on the transit ridership is rebounding piece. With that, on Commuter Express and North Star, the bottom line there, does that include the bus express routes from suburbs? So that's all of those. Okay, perfect. So I'm getting head nods. So yes, thank you for that. So my next question with that is, like from my district, it's really difficult to take the bus routes to get into, especially for, I'm hearing it a lot from students because there just simply aren't, with reduction in routing, there's morning and then there's evening, so it's just during rush hour, but anybody who wants to get anywhere else is unable to. What is the timeline and what is the expectation for changes in that throughout the system as to when we think we run into a chicken and the egg problem as to when do we add more routes in order to get more people going, using transit, or how do you feel that's working?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Representative, it is a chicken or egg because if we have reduced capacity, it dampens demand. And we know as demand increases and as we're able to recruit and fill out our driver ranks, we will be expanding. We're very hopeful for this spring. And I will look over to our operations there. I think that's something we're actually looking at closely now as to kind of what can we realistically bring in. Certainly, in terms of our capacity. We want to do it as quickly as we can, knowing that we also we're looking at the B line, some other lines that we're actually expanding the system. Now ABRT isn't quite as much of an operator increase as you would think because it's replacing a lot of existing service. But having said that, we're really hopeful this spring we start adding more routes back in.
Thank you. Follow-up, quick follow-up, yeah.
Thank you. And then my second is on when we got sworn in, I wrecked my truck, and so I've been taking transit very often. But I've been riding the train a bunch, and so we have through the past worked on transit safety, and it is a massive problem. So I'd like to understand a little clearer as to what you're doing, and then also what you need from us for transit safety and making sure that it is a safe, comfortable ride for everybody who wants to be using, especially the train.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, Representative Tepke, absolutely. As I mentioned, it's the highest priority. I'm happy to share, and we'll share our 25, action plan. There are a number of things. One, certainly, is the ability to provide citations rather than criminal tickets by some of our community service officers. This is something that has been supported by this committee in the past, and I think is timely. No one of those actions is the solution, and it is challenging because, we're behind the curve, in terms of what's acceptable behavior. And as we kind of both bring in resources, including more community service officers, more police, but also working hand in hand with every kind of entity, whether it be a social service agency, counties, cities, other jurisdictions. This really takes, as they say, the whole village. And we will be talking more and talk a lot with everybody from the Airport Commission to cities about how do we manage this public space. And some of it isn't just a question of the platform. There are areas in the platform where you need a ticket, but it's but enforcing those kind of behaviors is one that will take some time. But we also know that as we work through this plan, create safe spaces, people feel comfortable coming to them, then the more people you have, the safer the feeling is. And we've seen that in other cities. We certainly are working and learning from other cities about the fact that transit itself is one of the biggest challenges for every area of the country.
Thank you. We will proceed now to Representative Kraft and Chair Cagle. And again, quick questions, quick answers.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. More of a comment maybe because my question was addressed by Vice Chair Tabke, but that slide on slide 8, I found it accurate but misleading because you're showing that without showing any context of the schedule changes. So I question, why is BRT going so well? I like the concept of BRT, but if you look on further slide, you see that schedule is changing a lot. So I would just encourage you to really think about how to present this data because it doesn't present an accurate picture this way.
Mr. Chair, Representative, duly noted. In that fact, we have so many slides on ridership. One of the concerns we had is to kind of overwhelm with data and our own eyes glaze over. But we're happy to kind of find ways to show, ABRT does represent a smaller kind of, section of a ridership. The workforce is really the bus system itself, which is increasing, and that's just maybe the thing to kind of take away from that.
Thank you. Yes, I mean, as service goes down, ridership goes down, and I think that's always been an issue over many years, not just during COVID. Chair Cagle.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. quick question on slide 11. There's like the little dots that are going east-west and a couple north-south. What are those? I'm like looking at the A line where it terminates and then cuts across west towards the D line.
Well, again, the data, excuse me, Mr. Chair, Representative Cable, the dots are are part of the plan in the future. If you're thinking about some of the east-west lines, there's certainly the B line along Lay Street, that's under construction. And the others, I think it's maybe you're looking at the H line, which is a very long line, and that's, again, really slated
No,
for
it's
opening as long as
The
far as
really light
2030.
ones.
Yeah, there's dotted lines that are
Kind of runs right
light. Yeah.
parallel with the, anyway, maybe we can
Well,
answer
yeah,
that
we'll,
question offline.
I think we're going to have a whole ABRT
Yeah,
part
we'll
of
go
it
into
here.
much greater depth.
So then my other question is, can you please explain a little bit more about Metro Transit Micro? Looking at that map, you see a lot of gaps, especially kind of in the North Metro, where you can't get from like, let's say, Blaine to Brooklyn Park. And so just kind of curious about Metro Transit Micro and some of those gaps, how you see us filling those gaps in service?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, Representative Cagle, we have a pilot program now in North Minneapolis with microtransit, really demand response to both feed the system and provide service within that district. I think that there is an opportunity in the future for underserved areas, particularly in endpoints of some of our larger transit ways like the Blue Line. And it's one that we're exploring. I think that there's no question that microtransit and frankly just various alternative ways of mobility is our opportunities for the future.
Thank you. We're going to be also talking about that. Last year we funded in our bill a program in suburban transit that's working on that, and I know you have one, that North Minneapolis one. So that's really important stuff. I'm glad you brought that up, Chair Cagle. Okay, our last two questions are from Representative Petersburg and Representative West. Representative Petersburg.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Mr. Chair Zelli and Ms. Bogie for coming here today. I sure appreciate the position that Met Council is in with all the pulls and tugs between city, council, consumers, state, federal, et cetera. This is a transportation committee, so I'm going to ask a couple questions just in regard to your transportation side. On page 8 that we talked about earlier, North Star and commuter rail looks like it's kind of stopped its recovery of ridership, and it is low. And if I remember right, even pre-COVID, the subsidy for each rider per trip was quite high. And so I'm inquiring if you know what that subsidy per rider per trip is, and if not, if you could get it to us, I appreciate that. And how are you dealing with the hemorrhaging of those subsidy dollars compared to the rest of the system?
Chair Zelli.
Mr. Chair, Representative Petersburg, no question, North Star continues to be an issue, an area of study and intense debate. It was not well performing in terms of that subsidy per passenger before the pandemic, and now with the actual numbers of trips being dramatically reduced, I know it's even worse. We'll get those numbers for you. There is a robust study sponsored by the funding partners, counties, state, and the Met Council to look at what are various alternatives toward that North Star corridor, and that's certainly something we will be presenting and debating this year.
We authorized that study in the 2021 transportation bill. Representative Petersburg.
Thank you. And the other one is revolving around, I know there's still an issue in regards to the funding to finish the Southwest Light Rail. And if I remember right, back when the Met Council had to make the final approval process to the federal government, there was a funding package that they had to provide. And I'm wondering if you could provide that to us sometime. And then the other question is, with the short gap that there is, do you still have any plans for how you can come up with that difference?
Chair Zelli.
Mr. Chair, Representative Petersburg, as you know, we've had a number of funding solutions, and including $100 million of federal funds that has been transferred into our capital program for that purpose, as well as support from Hennepin County and some other federal funds. We are certainly focused, along with our partners, Hennepin County, the federal government. We are continuing to evaluate the project as to how we find the next final funding solution. I do think it's important to get through this phase where we're going through the highest risk area through the Kenilworth Tunnel to really understand what that gap is going to be. But I think so far, since we have renegotiated a baseline agreement with the civil contractor, we feel like we're on track and have the incentives to keep on the schedule that's been outlined a year ago. We're happy to share the information with you.
Representative Petersburg.
Yeah, thank you. If we could get that original funding plan that kind of discussed and determined where the funding would come from, that appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you. And we will get Representative West's question in and then adjourn. Representative West.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. First and foremost, on behalf of the city of Blaine, the people of Blaine, thank you for helping us get $10 million for Highway 65 through the regional solicitation program. That was very much appreciated. Second, and maybe we can take the answer on this question offline, but you mentioned Metro Mobility, and we did have like a working group on that with the peer-to-peer, seeing how we can use Uber, Lyft type services to supplement that or make it more economical, because I know it's fiscally very difficult program for the Met Council. I'm just wondering if there's any update on, I think there was a working group on that, any update there? But we can also take that answer offline if we wrap up.
We have a couple minutes here, and it's an important question, so thank you, Representative West.
Mr. Chair, Representative West, thank you, and I have driven on those roads in Blaine, and I'm thrilled that we're making progress on some of those roads in the North Metro and that area. Regarding Metro Mobility, I'm not aware of the conclusions of that group, so I can get back to you unless you do, Mary.
Okay,
No,
good. And we
we'll
did
get back to
have
you about that working group. Yeah.
And I thank you for raising Metro Mobility, Representative West. I think on a bipartisan basis, I thank Representative Koznick for some initiative on this. We were able to really, I think, stabilize long-term Metro Mobility funding in our 2021 transportation bill. And, hopefully that is working out well, given the challenges you have with that program. So, okay, members, thank you very much for a good, robust discussion with two of our key funding partners here and in this committee, MnDOT and Met Council. And we'll continue on with, I think, one bill on Thursday and then some additional overview presentations. With that, we are adjourned. Thank you, members.